I think for those that are up and coming is to trust the journey. If it is a spiritual journey and a spiritual path, trust the things that come in your path. When we were in school, I would tell all of the women that were in my cohort that were having challenging times, this is going to make you a better midwife. It's not just about checking off the boxes and taking the NARM test. It's about really knowing what gifts are coming through you individually and follow your spiritual path. Do that deep work. Know that the challenges are going to make you a better midwife.
Hi everyone, what's to follow is an amazing conversation with my friend and one of my early mentors, Blyss Young, who's a CPM. She practices out in Southern California area, and she's the co-host of probably my favorite birth-related podcast on the planet, which is called Birthing Instincts, which is co-hosted with Stu Fishbein, another friend and mentor. Both Stu and Blyss were out at the 2023 Born Free Twins Breach Conference, and they continue to be rocks and mentors and just supporters of my work. And I thought it was appropriate to bring Blyss into the studio to record a very heartfelt conversation. I was initially going to talk to her about due dates. That's what I had prepped her for. And she probably did all this background research and reading and was ready for that. But what our conversation actually turned into was a very, very touching, heartfelt, let me say heart-centered conversation around grief. Blyss, as she shares in this episode, lost her 18-year-old daughter to a gunshot wound and had to work through that. It probably will always be something that she's working through. But she's, life goes on and she's had to put those pieces back together and mourn the loss of her baby. The reason I think this is an interesting part of our conversation is not just how do you carry on after something traumatic happens, but grief and loss is inherently a part of birth work. There are no guarantees in childbirth, and it should be no surprise that many midwives and other types of birth workers will go into death doula work, or they feel some calling to the end of life sort of side of things, which of course is my other board specialty. So I've had this opportunity to sit with birth and death. And when we talk about this, when we intellectualize this grief and death and loss aspect of the human experience, it starts to become a little bit more natural with time. But when you speak to somebody like Blyss, who has been so directly impacted in such a traumatic way, it's hard to not be rattled by this type of conversation. It's very, very uncomfortable to use words like death, dying. We like to use words like they've crossed the rainbow, they've passed on, they've moved forward, they've left this place. And we try to use platitudes to make other people feel better. But while that in the short term makes it a little less uncomfortable and awkward at wakes and funerals, and when we're trying to support those that we love who are going through these traumatic experiences, you don't ever really fully complete your grieving. And if you're going to avoid it altogether, that is going to manifest in other maladies later in your life. After this conversation, I found myself very rattled. It is just so hard to know and love this person, Blyss, and also to know that in her most private times after the loss of her daughter, that she had to just sit with these feelings. And it's just so hard to really appreciate if you haven't gone through it yourself. And there are a couple other episodes that are sort of related to this type of grief and this loss conversation. One was with Christine Laria, the other was with another mentor of mine, Stephen Jenkinson, where we really kind of explore the gift and sometimes the privilege of losing people close to us. And I'm not saying that what happened to Bliss's daughter was a gift, but when we even face our own mortality, there is perhaps another way to look at it instead of something to be, run away from, which is why it makes it so hard when we lose people close to us. Perhaps we should embrace this reality that we are going to die and that there are no guarantees in how long we're going to live, or even when we get pregnant, that we're going to have a living child after this, after all is said and done. So if I can geek out a little bit, I'm a huge J.R.R. Tolkien fan. I've read every single book that he's put out, including the Silmarillion. Yes, that took me a long time, but I did it. And Tolkien has he's not just a storyteller. He actually has an entire creation story. This is like this sort of cosmology or creation myth that he's come up with. And in the story of Middle Earth, there were a variety of different species, for lack of better terms, of different types of living beings. And there was most notably the men and the elves. And both the men and the elves were given a gift. The men were given the gift of mortality, and elves were given the gift of immortality. So men, just like us, are going to live so long. They can be slain in battle or they can die of old age. Elves cannot die of old age. They can be slain in battle. But there's an element of envy within the elves of this mortal, this mortal facet of the gift of men, of living the life of a man. And the men create these incredible monuments and statues to memorialize their great feats, their great conquers, their battles that are won. And the elves, because they have like the gift of time in memoriam. They don't have to worry about old age. They don't do as much. They're not drawn to act whenever Middle Earth is being threatened by these various, demonic forces and these evil armies. And so sometimes the men have to pull the elves into battle, and the elves don't have any real compelling reason to do that, except that they feel some sort of ethical kind of notion around what's right and wrong. And there's a little phrase that I remember hearing Stephen Colbert, who's also a big fan of Tolkien. He had said this in an interview. What if God's punishments are also gifts? And Stephen Jenkinson relates this. What if you could acknowledge, many people acknowledge that, like when we talk about death, I've never lost anybody that I was so close to that I felt like really like I struggled with the grief. Well, Stephen Jenkinson would implore you to consider, what kind of admonishment is that you've never experienced a loss like what Blyss has experienced. It's acknowledging that you've never allowed yourself to love or deeply or to get close enough to somebody that when they die, that your life feels like your heart is completely ripped to pieces. So this mortality thing is a really important part of the work that we do in maternity care. And without us acknowledging that death is on the line, maybe not even physically, but maybe emotionally, spiritually, mentally, whatever, that there is a ripping apart of a person and then putting back together, even on an energetic level. If we can acknowledge that and we can be present with birth, we naturally have to be able to confront mortality. And I think that's probably why Blyss is just such a great midwife and such a great human and such a great mother and such a great friend. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. Feel free to grab some tissues. Feel free to let it out, because when you suppress this emotional baggage, you don't have to get rid of it. You don't have to just say, oh, let bygones be bygones. Forget about that person. Life goes on. But just to acknowledge how hard it is to lose people. These are practice rounds for your own inevitable facing of mortality. So I encourage you just to lean in a little bit here. Take this one in pieces if you have to. But it is a very, very rich conversation with a dear friend. We have two sponsors of this episode. One is WeNatal. which makes my favorite prenatal vitamin. Has plenty of the nutrition you're looking for, as an insurance policy for hopefully an already healthy lifestyle. But they're also very conscious about their packaging. They send you a glass jar and sleeves. And those sleeves come every month in very, very eco-friendly packaging. You just fill up the glass jars. I love that about this company. A lot of other supplement companies are not paying attention to the amount of waste and pollution that we're producing in the world by virtue of wanting to get the best methylfolate or whatever else. I love that. They also send you a journal, which is a mind-body journal, because they're just dialed in to the reality that this is not merely a nutritional or a physical issue that a woman is going through when she's pregnant and having a baby. So I love WeNatal. There's a lot of new companies that are popping up, but this is my preferred vitamin. If you're looking to take advantage of their special offer for listeners, which is a free bottle of their Omega DHA Plus, which is a really nice fish oil, you go to wenatal.com/beloved, any prenatal vitamin purchase, and they make his and her vitamins. They also make this fish oil. Those are the only 3 products that they make, which is another reason that I love them so much. They're not like trying to do magnesium and this and Shilajit and all these other things. They're just doing what they do so well. And that's why Mark Hyman is also endorsing this brand. He's one of my mentors in the functional medicine community. Go to wenatal.com/beloved at any prenatal purchase. If you were to then add an omega-3, their Omega DHA Plus to your cart, it'll be comped, and then you'll be off to the races, getting the very, very best to you, your baby, your uterus, your placenta, all of the things, in order to make sure that you can have at least one of those boxes checked to have your dream birth. Another company that is supporting this episode is Immune Intel AHCC, founded and created by my friend and co-creator of the Clear and Free program we have on holistically clearing HPV and dealing with abnormal pap smears. Mimi developed this product and has made it available with a very, very little, very, very minimal markup, unlike many supplements that are 300% marked up. There's a very, very minimal profit margins, which is why their offer of 10% off, if you go to themedicine.com, no E at the end of medicine, THEMEDICIN.com, and use code beloved10, you'll save 10% on Immune Intel AHCC. I take a bottle of this every 3 to 4 months just to keep my immune system dialed in. If you're ever taking any supplements, it's good to cycle on and cycle off. Oftentimes I'll do 3 weeks on, 1 week off of various supplements. Sometimes it's 1 month on, 3 months off, like I do with Immune Intel. But this is made from the mycelia of shiitake mushrooms. It upregulates a lot of your cancer-fighting elements in your immune system, namely your T cells and NK cells. It improves the interconnectivity between those cells. If you have chronic inflammation from any source, and of course, HPV is just a reflection of an inflammatory process. It's an invitation to look more deeply at your health. Then you can use something like C-reactive protein. And if you take this, you'll even see C-reactive protein levels dropping. There's so many uses for Immune Intel AHCC, which is why I recommend it to so many of my clients for so many different reasons. And frankly, I don't take a lot of podcast sponsors. Like, there's just not a lot of products that are fully in alignment with me. But Mimi's Immune Intel is absolutely one of those products, which is why I'm happy to have them as a podcast sponsor. But if you've got HPV, if you've got abnormal PAPs, if you've got any sort of inflammatory autoimmune condition, you're going to get some benefit from Immune Intel. Again, themedicine.com, medicine without the E. Use code beloved10. You'll save yourself 10%. I can't recommend either of these brands, WeNatal or Immune Intel, enough. And I hope you'll let them know you're listening by going to their websites, checking out their stuff. Send me a message if you have any questions. Of course, you can find me at belovedholistics.com or on Instagram at Nathan Riley, OBGYN. I've got my full list of favorite brands of a variety of different things on my website. But if you have any questions, you can reach out on the website, or you can send me a message on Instagram. I answer all of those messages myself. So, all right, let's get into this very, very hard conversation, but very, very needed conversation with my friend, Blyss Young. All right, buckle up, buckaroos. Blyss Young is in the studio. Whoop, whoop. Blyss, you're a mentor to me without probably realizing it. I think the term mentor's probably misappropriated in a variety of ways, but I mean it very directly. And Do you want to share with everybody how we know each other? Do you just want to just knock that one out? Let's get that out of the way.
Yeah, it's like one of my claim to fames. I knew Nathan Riley when. So you were kind of shadowing Dr. Stuart Fishbein, and I was at the end of my training as a midwife. And so you attended a home birth where I was primary for a client. And so I remember very vividly being in this woman's house. She was a multip. And we went there a little early because she, you know, the way that Dr. Stu works is that he would travel all over. So we kind of, you know, knew that we needed to get there on the earlier side. And when we got there, we could tell when she opened the door that she wasn't ready to have a baby. So we kind of got all set up and checked and did what we needed to do. And then we all went and laid down on the couch. And so I was kind of like showing you the ropes about what we do in home birth. And I said, watch. 3 a.m. is the witching hour. We will hear something shift around 3 a.m. And lo and behold,
Yeah.
right around 3, things shifted. Yeah. So I remember being at your very first home birth.
And things didn't just shift for that woman and her partner, you know, having a baby. They shifted for me pretty dramatically. I went home and my wife could see that I was like inspired again. It was a really important night for me. And since then, of course, you know, the rest is history, as they say, but you have remained in my life as a mentor, and you and the good Dr. Fishbein, who will never fully retire. You guys remain probably my favorite podcast out there. Like,
thank you.
There's no way to copy what you guys do, because you guys have this this banter, this beautiful kind of chemistry between one another. And it's very similar to Sarah Rosser and myself, but Sarah and I don't have a podcast. And I leave it to you guys to go through the literature and to talk about some of the real specifics to birth. And what I love to do here is to actually get to know people on a deeper level and try to understand maybe what brought them into this work, how we might view this, not just through the lens of the physical, but also through some of the more spiritual. And you're kind of legendary, and it doesn't seem like you're slowing down anytime soon. So you came out to my conference this past year in 2023, the Twins Breach Conference, and we learned from the good Dr. Fishbein, and we learned from Milo Chavira, who was another one of my mentors while I was in residency, and, you know, the Breach Without Borders crew, and Betty Ann Davis. And it was just a lovely event. And during that event, I want to go right for the throat here. During the event,
let's do it.
There was a breath workshop offered by my friend Sarah Charmoli, which is a type of somatic breath work called effigy breath that we used in our own birth of our home, you know, during our home birth in 2021 of Everly. And I remember there was all these birth workers laying there, and Sarah's kind of guiding them through this breath. And afterwards, I could tell you were having a hard time. And I went over and we just kind of held one another for a period. And I know that you're not super connected to that experience, but I actually think that what came up for you during that session is actually relevant to the connection that we have to our kids and to our unborn children. And I want you to share just off the cuff, maybe, what do you recall from that experience, and why was it so hard to go so deeply inward, given some of the life circumstances that have unfolded for you and your family?
I don't know that it was difficult to go deeply inward. I wouldn't describe it as that. I would say that I do breath work, and I've done a lot of processing. So I'm not afraid to go deep. Sometimes being in a room full of people that you don't know very well, it can be, you have to give yourself permission to like let go and be safe. And I know that there were other people in the room who didn't feel safe and didn't really let themselves go. But I did. I felt safe with you, and I felt safe with the Sarah. Is that
Sarah? Another. I have a lot of Sarahs in my life. Sarah,
you do.
In this case, yeah.
Yeah, the woman who led the breathwork session. But for those of you who don't know, my daughter, Sky, she's my middle child. She was shot and killed in 2019. And obviously, you know, it's a big part of my fabric now. It's woven into every aspect of who I am. And I felt in that breathwork session that I was connected to her experience in the hospital. Like there were actually some physical manifestations that happened while I was breathing that mimicked her body when she was in the ICU.
Mm.
And there was a period of time that I actually felt like my body didn't need breath. It was almost like I stopped breathing, but not in a scary kind of holding my breath kind of way. It was like it was suspended, which was very wild to like not breathe, but not feel
Wow.
that kind of like panicky, I need to take a breath
Gasping. Yeah.
feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it was very much my experience in that moment was like, I could just decide to let go. Now I wasn't going to, but I did have that experience. And I do feel from, you know, when you lose a child, there's a lot of different ways that you can live on. And some people don't fully ever really come back to life, if that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
They're here, but they're not living. And it was a very difficult, obviously, experience to survive. And there were times that I was like, I don't really want to be here. I'd rather be wherever she is, you know, especially when you start looking into like near death experiences and what people talk about, how there's a euphoria and, you know, people talk about like whatever your belief systems are. This is what I've studied and learned from people who have done like hypnosis on people who are not believers in any kind of afterlife,
Yeah.
who were studying and did hypnosis, and the patients would report the exact kind of same scenarios.
Mm.
So I was like, why am I here? This is right before 2020. So then we went into lockdown.
What happened in
Whole world
2020? Something happened.
the whole world kind of went nuts. And I was like, what are we doing? Do I really want to be here? You know, but I have two other children. And eventually I was like, well, of course I'm not going to take my life. I'm not going to go anywhere. I'm going to be here for my boys. And the kind of person that I am is if I'm going to be here, then I'm going to live as fully as I can. So integrating this really intense experience, not just losing a child, but losing a child in a dramatic way.
Yeah.
Having to go through a murder trial, which just happened this summer, 4 years later.
Wow. I
You
didn't know
know,
about that.
yeah, I haven't really talked about it much on our podcast. Just Stu keeps asking me, but I'm like, it just didn't,
Mm.
you know, there wasn't really a place to bring it in.
Yeah.
But so I had that experience of this breathlessness. And I was like, oh, this is what it feels like to choose to let go. I don't know that everybody always chooses to let go, but I do think that there are people who have that experience where they get to decide whether they want to come back into their body or not. And I think my daughter Sky was one of those people who was ready to go. And that has helped bring me a sense of peace. It doesn't mean that I don't miss her and I don't wish that she was still here with us. I'm getting a little choked up. You know, there are days I still really cry and grieve. But my main agenda is to live on, you know, and to enjoy life the best that I can. I am a different person. I'm not as optimistic as I used to be, I don't think. I'm still a pretty optimistic person, but it's changed.
You mean about society in general, or about your work as a birth worker, or all of the above? Yeah.
All of it, you know. I've always been a very kind of like see the brighter side kind of things. But when you really start to get into a spiritual path, you really learn a lot about like the shadow work and being grounded and having balance. And midwives traditionally were the medicine women, you know, similar to shamans. So shamans help cross that bridge from light to dark. And so I think that when you really are doing the work,
Mhm.
you can't avoid the dark parts of humanity and life and death. I don't shy away from any of that anymore. That's why I told you, I'm like, you can ask whatever you want about this, because I think that and I know you agree with this, I think that we have death kind of in the shadows, just like a lot of times birth hasn't been. I mean, thank God we're more visual about it now. Instagram and all of these things, people are actually getting to see images of real birth again, like
Yeah.
we did when we lived in small villages, and we would see people die and we would see people be born, and it wasn't so like compartmentalized.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't shy away from any of that, and I don't feel like a lot of people want to engage in those conversations, so I'm not going to like force it on people, but I'm happy to go deep with someone like you who has a reverence for it, and is wanting to understand the connection of all of these things.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate that, Blyss. And I appreciate you sharing and just being a little vulnerable with me as well. I kind of, people who listen to my podcast they're no stranger to my views on birth and death being two sides of the same coin. But I almost feel like we actually can't really serve women who are giving birth without facing the mortality piece. I can't tell you how many women, and of course, I'm no expert in childbirth because I'll never have a baby. There's absolutely no way for me to ever be an expert, which gives me a little pang of like, I don't know, regret. I don't know what I'm regretting, but it's like, gosh, it would be really interesting to know what it's like to bring life into the world as a means of facing, my own limitations in this physical corpus, to appreciate those things beyond the veil. So, using
Yeah,
psychedelic medicines or breath work or deep contemplative practices can get you close. But I almost
yeah,
feel like women are an expert in death as a result of being experts in birth,
yeah,
which sounds, like we say all these things, but I guess whenever you directly are confronted with mortality through the death of a child, I just can't really comprehend. It's not a matter of understanding it. It's a matter of trying to empathize and to get as close as I possibly can. And when I saw you in that breathwork session, I knew it was something about sky, but I wasn't totally certain if you were able to or even wanted to talk. We just kind of sat there together and were present, and I was just holding you, and I could almost feel what you were feeling without knowing what you were feeling. And so this sort of theme of presence, I think, is really, really critical in providing the type of care to the birth process that people like us seek to provide.
yeah.
So this isn't the only loss in your family. Your brother John was also on my podcast, and I hadn't even realized he was your brother. But I had taken care of Claire, who became somewhat of a celebrity in the cystic fibrosis space. Your niece Claire passed away. I want to say she was in her early 20s.
21.
21, yeah. And in my conversation with John, he had shared, well, my daughter Claire and this and that. And I was like, Claire, huh? Claire. And he was like, she was at UCSD for cystic fibrosis. I was like, Claire, oh my gosh, I took care of her as a fellow in my palliative care program when I was at UCSD. Like,
Really?
and yeah, I had been in the room with her,
Wow.
and there was all of these cards and flowers and all these things. And I was like, who is this woman? And
She's amazing.
she had this amazing spirit to her. And I probably even met
Mhm.
your brother, but I wasn't ever focused on the family. I was really kind of dialed into who this person was that I was caring for.
Yeah.
Um, and he actually, put some language to the reality of what it means to lose a child, because as have you. And it's amazing that you're brother and sister. But what I want to say about this loss piece, which is so critical in sort of owning autonomy in childbirth, is, of course, nothing is guaranteed. Yet we actually act as if it's not fair for a parent to bury their child. And we push this so far that it almost becomes this sort of illusion that you're not a parent if you don't have kids. But in some ways, I actually feel like every pregnancy loss, every IUFD, every neonatal loss, heaven forbid, that might even be, I don't know what's harder, but that to me has always seemed like one of the most wrecking things for me inside. That even if something doesn't go well, like let's say that this baby decided, as Sky did, that, okay, I wanted to go through the pregnancy experience, but I'm not meant to be earthside during this contract or whatever you want to call it. They may decide I'm gonna take off, which is why 30 to 40% of IUFDs, for example, stillbirths, are completely like, we just don't know why it happened. Maybe the
Right.
baby decide that. Maybe they decided that. And for the parents out there that have experienced this, whether it's a loss of an 18-year-old, a 21-year-old, or a brand new baby,
Yeah.
it doesn't make you less of a parent. You're still a parent and you're still postpartum. You're still postpartum. So Blyss, as a mother of three, and as somebody who has lost and grieved the loss of a child that you got to see grow up to early adulthood, what advice do you have for people out there that have experienced the death of a baby? Like, how do we as a society collectively support one another when these inevitable things sometimes happen out of our control?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it helps me speak to people as a midwife in a very different way of
Mm,
like nothing is ever guaranteed, and we I really can embody that now in a different kind of way than I did before. I think it's really important to show up for one another, and I can tell you that I'm still processing um, my own resentments and disappointments for people who didn't actually show up for me. That's just the work that I'm doing. That's something I'm focusing on this year. But in other ways, and I learned this ahead of time. Maybe it's because I loved and experienced the loss of Claire just 1 year before I lost Sky. But I knew that people would say that there's friends and family members that you may not be close to anymore, but there are other people that will come into your life that will be very important to you. And I was overwhelmed by the love and support that I got from my community.
mm,
And I think I've never felt so loved in my entire life as I did during that time. And so I think that that's the thing that is the most important, is that just similar to like how we coach people in a labor situation, the mom's having this massive experience, and sometimes I tell men, like, I know it feels like you want to step away from her and give her space, but what you actually want to do is lean in, and even if she doesn't want to be touched, you want to be present and you want to physically be there. And I think sometimes with loss, because it feels so like you want to say and do the right thing, I think it's about really just showing up. And even if
mm.
you have nothing that you want to say,
Yeah,
just your body
be
being
there.
with their body, doing things for them, bringing food, helping out. I think that to me was the most and it sounds so simple, but to me that was the most profound thing, was being able to be in this deep grief and connect with people on a profound level and not
Yeah,
feel like I had to shy away from that.
mm,
Um, and so I
that's such
think
good
as a
advice.
culture, I think that's a really important thing, that we just stop feeling so scared and just know that the human connection is still going to be the most profound thing that we can do for one another. And it really simply can be like showing up and putting your hand on someone's knee and not even talking, you know?
Yeah. It's kind of like after the breath work. It was like, I have nothing to say to
Right.
Blyss. I just am gonna sit here right next to you and try to co-regulate and this to the same cadence of your breathing. And there's nobody out there to teach this. This is really a matter of just being present and really feeling in to what a person who's experienced a loss is going through. I'm not tooting my horn. I'm just saying I got lucky there in
Yeah.
not having anything to say. Like that was almost like it was almost like exactly what you needed maybe in that moment, or maybe not. It's really neither here nor there.
Yeah.
But when I was in residency, I was up in LA at Kaiser, and a good friend of mine, we were out having drinks, and he passed on like the nachos or something. Like we ordered some hors d'oeuvres, and he was like, "I'm having tummy troubles." And a couple weeks later, he went into his doctor, and they did a colonoscopy, and they found he was riddled with colon cancer. And this is like a young 30-something-year-old guy. And shortly thereafter, he had surgery, and I was, going into palliative care. I had some experience with some of these communication styles, and I went in to see him immediately after his surgery. And he had so much cancer in his belly that they didn't even remove anything. It was just long forgone, and he was going to die, but they were going to do aggressive treatment. So I helped from the symptom management side of things. Actually, I guess I was in. When he had his surgery and started treatment, I think I must have been in fellowship. No, I don't know. Maybe not. Anyways, when he passed away, his partner, his surviving partner, and they had gotten married just before he died, just as a means of connecting deeper to one another. She had shared with my wife and I, Stephanie, that she became so exhausted from the platitudes that people had shared. Like, oh, he's in a better place now,
Mm-hmm.
or he's not suffering anymore. And she said, I know that that's really well intentioned, but the one that really got her, that really frazzled her, was everything heals with time. And she's like, I'm never going to heal from this. I might be able to pull up my bootstraps and get back to living, but I'm never going to finish grieving this. And she shared this beautiful TED talk. Maybe you've seen it, Blyss. It's by somebody named Nora McInerney. We Don't Move On from Grief. And she shares a similar story about having lost her husband to a really horrible cancer, and leaving their kids for her to raise on her own, and how she had to move forward on, for the benefit of her other children, similar to you and Sky. And what she emphasized, it was a TED talk. What she emphasized was, you never actually fully heal from this. So let's stop pretending that it just goes away at some point. You wake up and it's like everything's bright and sunny again. Instead, as a community, when you say show up, I love your description of what people can do, because I think oftentimes we feel like we don't have the aptitude to show up for people because it hasn't been modeled. I don't like funerals, it's too morbid for me. Or we don't talk about death, we don't talk about mortality, we don't even talk about birth around the dinner table, because it's just too close to something catastrophic, and it's too scary, it's too whatever. And what she said is like exactly what you said, is like, it's okay that we don't just brush this aside. In fact, in order to get to where you've gotten after the loss of Sky, or that your brother got after the loss of Claire, requires you to actually fully feel into the grief. And that is really something that's uncomfortable in our society, unlike many other cultures where birth and death are just a part of what we do here. And we support one another, and we lean into one another, and we surrender to this grieving process. But I don't think too many people are really talking about that. We try to bypass it in some way with platitudes. So I don't know. Did anything come up for you there in what I was just sharing?
Absolutely. It's so funny because I have my holistic midwifery book open to due dates, because that's originally what we were going to be talking about.
Yeah. Let's
so
talk about
it's
it.
so funny. I'm like, oh, we're not going to talk about that. So many things, Nathan. So first of all, we're missing a very, very potent opportunity when we don't show up for people during that time, because of our fear of lacking, not knowing what to say, or being present for someone who is having big feelings. Like we're like so uncomfortable. But doesn't that sound so familiar to birth?
Yeah.
Like, we're missing something so potent when we're not willing to fully embody what our human experience is. So, as human females, we give birth. We have, like you were saying, there's this opportunity, whether you're spiritual or not, if you are able to have those dialogues of a spiritual conversation, like, we are touching the veil. And if you can't, there's something radical happening inside of your body where you will experience what it feels like to be a mammal and to not be someone who's using your thinking brain. And it is amazing to experience yourself that way and to be present in the room. I always tell women, like, if you really lean into it, your energy is going to lead the entire space. And it is radical to have these experiences with people. And when you shy away from the intensity and you always just want to have that bright, shiny feeling, which I get it. It's lovely, right? To feel good, to have orgasms,
It's intoxicating to feel great.
it's awesome.
Yeah.
But I'll tell you, from being in the depths of grief, when I first was able to look at a bird chirping, or to really be present for the sound of a beautiful song coming on, the contrasting experience, when you really lean into the full intensity of what it means to be human, then you can have the experience of the opposite of that realm, right? So if you're just sitting in the middle, you're missing so much of what it means to be human on both of those spectrums, life and death. And I, in some ways, even though it was a really intense time, I miss the quality of conversations that I was having with my intimate circle during that time, because we were like really talking about deep, profound spiritual concepts. And I, I didn't say something like to myself, like, I don't believe in God anymore. It was more like, I used to tell people, yeah, God is still my homie, but we're on a break right now, because I was really angry. And when I would talk to, like spiritual guides and stuff, they would be like, it's okay to be angry right now. Like, just lean into that, So I was like really grappling with, like, where did Sky go? What is her experience now? Is she
so
okay? So there are a couple of books that I really, really, really enjoyed. One of them was the Wild Edge of Sorrow. Beautiful book that talks about that talks about, like, culturally how we can sit in circle and help each other grieve, and how we don't do that in this culture. The other one was The Smell of Rain on Dust.
By he's a
I don't remember the names of either.
Yeah, The Smell of Rain on Dust. He wrote
Yeah, and actually,
Martin Prechtel, I think, is his name.
there you go.
Beautiful
Yeah.
writer.
Yeah. And in that book, actually, there's a chapter in the very beginning about being in utero and birth. And it talks about, that's our very first experience of quote unquote death, is because when you're in utero, you have the experience of, this is your whole world. You don't know anything other than that. So when you're born, the world that you've been living in before is now gone, and you're in this new existence. So, you start to think about, like, that's a trip, right? and when we leave this body, there's a belief system that you go on to somewhere else. So I really went deep with those concepts, and that's what helped me. My spiritual practices helped me be able to find a sense of peace around it. Again, that doesn't mean that I don't still grieve, because I still am a human. I'm still in a body. I'm still here. So I'm still having the human experience, even though I can connect with what the soul's journey is. And so I encourage people to find something besides this tangible world to be able to have faith in, because I don't know how you get through this life without that, with the hardships and the things that we go through. I just don't, I don't know how to guide you in that. And one of my sons has absolutely no faith in anything. And so sometimes we have these conversations and it's challenging for me. I'm like, yeah, I don't know. But for me, it made a huge difference to be able to walk this journey. And the other thing I wanted to say is that there's the 5 stages of grief, right, that we've all heard about. Well, the 6th one is to be able to find meaning, and to be able to utilize this pain and sorrow and transformation that you're experiencing to make a difference in someone else's life, or in the planet as a whole. And so I think that if I was giving people advice, like, don't rush it, don't feel your feelings, go through the process that you have to go to, and know that you are not going to be able to go back to who you were before, but you're going to become somebody new. Not new, but you're going to evolve. And so just allow that alchemy to happen as long as it takes. And I think for those of us who are not the person in the center of that grief, is to to hold that you moved on. For most people, they're like, oh, that was a while ago, she must be doing okay. No, every day it's a process. So remembering that for people who have lost someone significant, it is forever for them. And ask about their loved ones, say their name, talk about their loss. You don't have to shy away from it. Most people want to talk about their loved ones. And so I think that's the challenge. That's the rub that we have in this culture, is it makes people uncomfortable. So be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying to sort of imagine what it would be like to, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is sort of another mentor. She's the one that came up with the stages of grieving, back in the 60s and 70s. She's this wildly German academic, brilliant woman. And she had said something around, gosh, what did she say? It was basically, I'm paraphrasing poorly, I'm sure, but she had basically said something like, when we approach the loss of a loved one, and I apply this in the Born Free method in some very new content we're adding on pregnancy loss and guilt and shame, and I'm using my unique skill set in order to try to put language to this. But I'm leaning on people like Carl Jung and Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and something she had said is that when we grieve the loss of a loved one, we're actually not grieving the story that we had with them or the connection we had with them. What we're grieving is the loss of what we envisioned we would be creating with them in the future. And I'm now going to start getting teary-eyed because I think about how this lack of being able to talk about it and to show up without being, doing the wrong thing or whatever, leads this person to go to bed every night and their breasts are engorged. And some women, by the way, will want to continue lactating because it actually still connects them to the baby that they were going to feed with that milk, which is highly irregular in how we talk about things. Of course, you want to suppress that. Suppress, suppress, suppress. Don't feel anything. I've had women tell me I want to keep lactating and I want to donate my breast milk because it actually allows me to think I'm still feeding a baby because I'm never going to feed that baby.
Yeah.
And this sort of acknowledging that you will always have this vision you created. You've dreamt it up for 9 months, maybe 10 months. You've dreamt up what it would be like to hold this baby and watch them grow into a race car driver or a whatever, a midwife. You're never going to be able to feed them that milk, and you're ever going to see any of those steps come to fruition because it's almost like it stopped dead in its tracks. Forgive the language. That's where I think we're oftentimes at a loss, and sometimes there isn't language. You can always have another baby. All this other stuff actually is not really hitting the point, and instead just going and saying, it could even be something as like, this sucks. Like, can I just sit here with you? Do you want to watch something on TV? Do you want me to make you something? Like, whatever. Don't ask, just do. And just acknowledging that they're not lamenting the baby they lost. They're lamenting the future that will not come to fruition. That is like one of the hardest things to hold, but that is the grieving journey, I guess, is accepting that.
Yeah. And as you were saying that, you're talking about wanting to breastfeed, wanting to have that experience still. You think about it, they're still, in some ways, even though they're grieving hormonally, they're still going to be releasing oxytocin. And so one of the things I think I learned in loving Claire and being part of that community is that it's mixed with laughter and joy and tears and inside jokes. And, sometimes you'll walk into a situation where people are grieving and you're like, are they okay? But you're not sad and crying all the time. Like there's all of these other things mixed into it. So I think it's about also like embodying and supporting the duality of it. And I loved when you said, this sucks, because one of my favorite things is when people would be like, this is so fucked up. You know, this is not fair. You know, this is
Yeah.
awful. And they didn't try and make it better, like you were saying, like just kind of placating it. And the other experience that I had that was really wild is even before I left the hospital, we were in the hospital for 5 days with her in the ICU. People were handing me Valium and sleeping pills and
Mm.
like, you know, friends, like good, like just trying to help me, right? But then I had an appointment with my therapist for 2 hours. We talked, and about an hour of that was talking about what kind of medication she should prescribe me. And I was thinking, is it coming? Am I going to completely like fall apart and I'm going to need to medicate myself? So I got the medicine just in case. Like maybe there's something I don't understand. Maybe I'm still in shock, and I'm gonna need these medications just to like keep my shit together. Um, I took Valium like once or twice, and I was like, I don't even understand why I would be taking this. But again, that's culturally, right? It's like we want to help you not feel these
Yeah.
feelings. But don't get me wrong. Sometimes the feelings are so big that you might need a period of time where you dampen those feelings until you feel ready to kind of titrate and take on a little bit more. And that is completely understandable and acceptable. Same with birth, right? How often,
Mm.
how many people are in their mind, I won't be able to handle this. It's going to be too much. I'm going to get medication, because that's what the modern woman should be able to do, is she should be able to medicate herself.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
that's your right. Again, you're missing out on something. However, we've also seen women who are suffering, and we don't want women to suffer, right? So take the medication, get a little nap, figure out how to regroup yourself and see if you want to change up once you wake up. Same kind of thing. But as a culture, we want the pill. We want that quick fix. We don't want to feel the big feelings. We want to kind of just get back to the status quo.
Right.
You're We're missing opportunities to have a deep, profound experience, and it's going to come and bite you in the ass somewhere else. You're not going
Right.
to get through life without feeling big feelings. It's, you know, it'll come out sideways. So you might as well open yourself up and let that grief roll through you. And again, as the person who's supporting you, um, just open yourself up to feeling the big feelings too, because there is beauty and laughter and joy and connection. I mean, the people who
Yeah.
were by my side in those days, I am like ride or die for those people. You know what I mean? Like whatever you need, I will be there, because they literally carried me through the early stages of my grief, and I would do whatever I could to help them in their lives.
Yeah. Hey guys, it's Nathan. Wanted to interrupt this amazing conversation very briefly to talk to you, specifically if you're a birth worker. This goes for doulas, childbirth educators, midwives of all sorts, whether you're out of hospital or in hospital, and especially the OBGYNs, the family medicine docs, those of you who are attending to births. I want you to ask yourself, if a person rolls into your practice and they're in labor and there's a bud emerging from the vagina, what are you going to do? What I was taught to do was, let's rush you to the operating room. Forget about informed consent. We have to do this through the abdomen. We have to do a C-section because the baby is breech. But frankly, I think a lot of women, rightfully so, want to avoid C-section, unnecessarily, of course. And so if you were to just rely on your, let's say your OBGYN residency training, you're not going to have the skills to attend to a breech birth. The good news is most breech babies come out without any intervention at all. But in the rare chance that they have a nuchal arm or a hyperextended neck or whatever, you want to have those skills. And it requires practice on practice on practice to get those skills, which is why I started hosting an annual conference here in Louisville. And in 2024, we're going to be leveling up this entire program. This is the 2024 Born Free Twins Breach Conference, where you're going to be able to get plenty of simulator experience with very, very well-trained educators and instructors. You're going to hear from a variety of midwives and some doctors. This year, we're featuring the Spinning Babies team, Breach Without Borders team. Stu Fishbine's going to be there. Christine Laria is coming with the Breach Without Borders team. She was a recent addition. Caro Gauchi from the Pacific Northwest is coming. We're also bringing 2 keynote speakers, Machilo Motse, who's a newly crowned PhD from South Africa, as well as Doña Angelina Martinez Miranda from Cuernavaca, Mexico, is coming. These are instructors that have quite a bit, a breadth of knowledge and experience in order to help round out your own education. I haven't even mentioned Tracy Vogel, who's an OB anesthesiologist. She's going to be coming in to talk about trauma-informed care. Hermine Hayes-Klein is coming to speak to informed consent. There is so much that we're offering here. And I've only gotten to the didactics part. There's going to be plenty of time to practice on very realistic mannequins. And there are going to be some other activities for you to do some healing and as a means of community building. So we're going to do some trauma release work, a musical odyssey with Rebecca Kelly G. There's going to be some ecstatic dance in the mornings. If you're open to that, it can be very, very releasing because we've suppressed so much of this stuff throughout our lives that if we can't use our voice and our bodies in an expressive way, it's going to become a second chakra issue. It's going to impact our reproductive organs and our overall health. We're going to be screening Aftershock and having a panel discussion with Shawnee Benton Gibson and Omari Maynard, both of whom were featured in the film because Omari's wife, who is also Shawnee's daughter, she died as the result of what I would call medical negligence due to the color of her skin in the medical system. And that's what Aftershock, the film, is all about. We're going to do a breathwork shop with Sarah Tremoli of Effigy Breath. There is just so much healthy food, healthy community, healthy conversation in a very, very safe space. No breakout sessions. You're all going to be in the same room together in a very intimate setting, which I think is very, very important for this work. If you're interested in coming, go to bornfreetwinsbreach.com. Register as early as you can because the price will gradually increase as we get closer and closer to the event. There are a few opportunities available for work exchange for students or people who are otherwise unable to attend for financial reasons. But everything will be on site at the Omni Hotel in downtown Louisville, a beautiful hotel with some very, very beautiful meals and beautiful spaces that we're all going to be sharing together. I hope to see you in Louisville. The dates are August 8th through the 11th with an opportunity to do either NRP certification or a simulator intensive workshop with one of our instructors on the 12th if you want to stick around. And for those who stick around, maybe there'll be some other goodies along the way. bornfreetwinsbreach.com. I hope to see you in Louisville. Yeah, a little something else that came up for me there is, I think this is also from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, is that grief is very confronting. You know, the feelings that you have to suffer through, so to speak, when you lost Sky or any woman, loses a baby in childbirth or even an early pregnancy loss. I think it all probably feels very similar in many ways.
Yes.
And I mean, it all also honestly could be even the loss of your mother, your aging mother. Like you lose somebody and you want to avoid the pain. Like it hurts, but you don't really want to avoid the grieving process because that's actually the path to healing and to moving forward. And it's hard, I think, in our society when we don't like to feel anything to distinguish the pain of loss versus the grieving process. And when you don't see the difference there, it becomes a complicated grief that can lead to some really, really challenging spaces like suicidal thoughts and all of this other stuff that we use these diagnoses, but really it's frankly like, is this a healthy grieving process or is this an avoidance process? Because that avoidance process, you can't escape it. You're still having to think about it whenever you go to bed at night, but you could use these medicines and not have to think about it. You can obliterate yourself with alcohol or amphetamines or whatever and just run away, which is what we see in a lot of substance abuse disorders. I'm not saying that I'm not trying to make a connection here, but what I am saying is that I can understand how in our society people would be led down a very, very troubling path if they didn't have a supportive, community that would allow them to grieve in a healthy way.
Yeah. But I think it's also an inside job.
Yeah.
I mean, it's great. It's great to have community, but ultimately what I came to was it's me. I'm going to have to walk through this process, and I went on what I consider kind of like a walkabout. I remodeled a not antique, but an older RV, and I drove by myself for 6 months, and I walked and was in nature, and I just went in. I went directly into the heart of it as much as I could without having to be responsible for children or clients or anything else, because as a birth worker, my phone is always on. It might not even be going to a birth, but someone might want to text me about their mucus or, I don't know, something going on with their belly button so there I am in my grieving process, like talking to my kids about these deep, profound things. And then I get a ding and I'm like pulled out.
Nathan Riley is texting you at 6 a.m, some random shit he found online, and you're like, I'm sleeping, you son of a bitch. Thank you.
So I needed to go away and just be able to focus on me. So ultimately you have to do the work yourself, even if you have the most supportive, loving people in your life. You have to make the decision to get up and walk through this life in the ways that work for you. And I hope that people do find their way to some sort of joy again, because what I've been told stories of people who never get out of bed. They lose somebody profound to them and they just never live again. And that sounds like a horrible existence to me. So I wish for everybody that they can find how to walk forward again, but to not rush themselves. And something else you said about loss that I've said since this experience happened, because people would look at me and they'd be like, oh, but yours is so much worse than mine. I'm like, there is no hierarchy in grief. Like, your loss is profound to you and to your life. Just because it's not your child, it could be that you lost your lover,
right.
That is all significant. And that's one of the things I loved about that book, that I talked about, The Wild Edge of Sorrow. I don't remember if it's like 10 or whatever, but he calls them the gates of grief. And he talks about we're all grieving. We're grieving the environment. We're grieving, the loss of something that didn't manifest in our life. We're grieving the loss of who we thought we were going to be. I mean, we all have these aspects of grief that is part of the human experience. And we're all going to lose significant people at some point or another. So again, when you open your eyes and you look at something and you face it and you feel it, you have a strength that comes through. And as I'm getting older, I start to think about wow, I'm going to start losing more and more and more people, which is, if you live a long time, that's part of our experience of getting older. And in the first couple of years, I was very much braced, I can't lose anyone else. I lost 5 people within 4 years, very important people to me. And Sky was the second to last. One of my best friends lost her husband almost a year after that. That was very, very close in my circle. Yeah. So I was very braced, oh God, please
don't do any more loss.
I just don't think I could handle anymore right now, and now I'm getting to the point where I'm like, I have to be ready, because, my mom's 80. My sister had a heart attack recently. This is just part of my beautiful dog, who's my co-pilot. She's 13. It's we're going to have to face this. Right. So how do we do it in a way where, we're alchemizing it? Ram Dass is another really beautiful person to connect with. He's passed on. He's not really a person that you can listen to his archives. Yeah. And he sat next to people who were dying, and then eventually had a stroke himself, and was still alive, but his body wasn't functioning in the same way. So his work is very profound if you want to talk about loss and grief and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Another resource that comes to mind, and I promise we might still get to some sort of midwifery chat here, 45 minutes in. I knew this was going to happen to me. I'm sorry. I let it get away from me, but this has been such a lovely conversation.
Good.
Another one of my mentors, his name is Stephen Jenkinson, and he runs a program called the Orphan Wisdom School. He's been on the podcast, and I found it very, very compelling listening to him talk about his work as a social worker on a palliative care service in British Columbia, I believe, or Ontario, somewhere up in the north of the United States. And he had said, he speaks to groups of people and he talks about the importance of facing mortality and the importance of losing people in our lives. And he said people would actually go up to him after his talks and say, Stephen, this is really insightful, but I've never lost anybody that was that close to me. And then he says, sort of in retrospect, he says, do you realize what type of admonition that is? That you've never lost somebody sufficiently that you went through the grieving process. Like you haven't allowed yourself to be close enough to anybody that their death actually impacted you on such a deeply transformative level. And he said, on the other hand, what if we looked at death as a privilege, and that death actually, because it's coming, no matter what we want to do, it doesn't matter how much longevity medicine or biohacking or whatever the hell you're practicing out there, you're going to die. And what if it was a privilege to die, and you get the gift of practicing facing your mortality throughout your life, as every one of your close friends and family members dies, and you have to grieve and grieve and grieve and grieve. In some ways, the grief and healing process is an allegory for life itself, which goes back to birth and death being two sides of the same coin. You can't welcome a baby into the world if you're not willing to confront mortality, whether you're the woman giving birth or you're the care provider that's there attending and holding space for this unfolding of life itself.
Well, you can, because people do it all the time.
You can.
You can.
Yes, maybe not the best way to support people.
You can, but what happens when you actually talk about that and you face it and you deal with the fear around having so much love and, like you said, thinking about the future with this person? I mean, I had it recently with my boyfriend. We were separated for a period of years and we're back together and kind of like rekindling and falling in love again. And those moments when you start to like realize that you're falling for somebody and you go, oh shit. When you open your heart to somebody, whether it be your child or a lover or a new friend, you automatically have this potential of having your heart broken. And so what is the alternative? The alternative is closing your heart down and never allowing yourself to feel these beautiful, deep feelings. Is that the kind of life that you want to live? Because as you were saying, if you haven't really connected to someone on a deep level enough to feel the grief of loss, you've also missed the opportunity to feel that deep, profound love. And I do know that this is part of my human nature. Is I've had so many heartbreaks over my lifetime. If I sat here and told you my life story, you would be like, holy moly. And I just keep picking myself up and dusting myself up because I'm still alive. I'm still here. So what do I want to make of this life? I could sit and look back, and I do once in a while look back and feel sad or regretful of something that I didn't do in the past. And I'm like, how much time do I want to spend on that? Because all I can do is look at where I am here and now and move forward. Again, connecting it to birth, how many people get themselves tripped up in labor where they're like, gosh, I wish I could go back to bed and get some sleep, or how long am I going to be in labor? I don't want to say secret, but one of the ways to really suck all the juice out of life is to be in the here and now, to be in this moment and look at the moment that you have in front of you. And how can I live this fully? And when you're in the middle of a grief pattern, what living this fully means is feeling your feelings to the degree that you need to. That's what there is to do. You can't get out of it. When you're in it, there's nowhere to go. Just like labor. I've just got to feel this sadness. I've got to feel this grief. And then, you know, in life, the lessons, like when we look at like growth, and maybe not everybody wants to grow as a human or evolve or become a better person. I'm sure that there are some people who are like, nope, that's not really something I want to do in this life. But for those of you who do, for those of you who are on a path, think about all of the times that you've really grown and expand. It's come from pain and challenge. Unfortunately, that's the gig, right? So you kind of have to figure out how to be with those challenging times and look at them like, okay, this is my growth edge right now. And when I'm on the other side, I'm going to have a bigger capacity. And as a midwife, I always look at all of the challenging things that have happened in my life give me the ability to have more compassion and more depth and more understanding for the person in front of me who's having that kind of challenging experience. So I don't like welcome it. I'm not like, bring it on. But when it comes to me, I'm like, all right, I'm going to work with this. I'm going to do the best that I can to be really, really fully present for all of what life has to offer. And unfortunately, this is part of it. Or fortunately, however you want to look at it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a whole bunch of things I want to ask you about birthwork, but we're not going to get to that today. So we're going to do a part 2. But I do want to go. We're not going to talk about due dates. In other
I feel
words,
honored. I get a part 2.
You get a part 2, one of the few. Even your brother didn't get a part 2.
What do you mean,
John.
even my brother?
I read his book and it was fantastic. Like, your brother's done good work, but he's not Blyss Young.
He's doing great work. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm saying all of this in a teasing manner. So let's say that you could go back into early Bliss's, I don't know, your childhood or whatever, and you were wanting to become a midwife. What do you think is actually required of a midwife? Like what does that calling mean to you now that you've really started to fully embrace the radically challenging aspects of the work, but also just of life itself? Like, what would 20-year-old Blyss, I don't want to say do differently, because I don't think I think you would answer that the same way I would. You wouldn't do anything differently. But if somebody's listening and they're maybe embarking on the journey into midwifery, what do you recommend that they do in order to show up in the way that that you and I both maybe would believe that a birth worker could, in a way that they could show up in a really responsible manner? I don't know if there's a question there. I hope that you understand what I'm asking.
Okay, I'm following you. I think it's
Okay.
Don't rush the process. Because for me, and this is a conversation that we kind of like talked about, maybe talking about, is the word midwife. And it's,
Yeah.
I look at Marin Green and Indie Birth, and they've decided that they're not going to even call it midwifery school anymore, because what midwifery is becoming is not necessarily what they're wanting to talk about or teach, right? And for midwives like us who really believe that it's a spiritual calling, that it's not like we are medical professionals because that's the world that we live in now, and we have those skills and we carry medications and we have a license, or some of us do. But for me, midwifery is the wise woman who lived in the village, who passed down this knowledge from generation to generation. And she knew about the plants in her area, and she had walked with the families, whether that moment in time when the baby emerges, it was either we're celebrating life or I'm walking this family through this hard journey. And that is an inherent part of the work that we do. And that's not how this modern culture is looking at it. So I'm sometimes really frustrated with the conversations and the direction that midwifery is going, but it's not going to help me to be frustrated. What's going to help me is to figure out a way to know what my message is and what my gift is, and the people who resonate with the message that I have to give before I leave the planet, they're going to find me. And so, one of my spiritual leaders, Dr. Michael Beckwith, the Rev at Agape, he said, be for something and against nothing, which is a very deep core philosophy that I hold.
For
So
something against nothing. Can you explain that?
be for something and against nothing. So
Oh,
I'm not going to.
Sorry, be for something and against nothing. Got it. I was combining the words in a different way. Sorry.
Yeah. So I don't spend a lot of energy fighting against something. I create what I am for and lift that up. And so I don't want to spend a lot of my energy and time fighting the system, like going in and trying to change the hospital policies or convince a midwife that she should do it differently. I'm like,
right.
Look, there's a midwife for everyone. This is what I believe. This is what I think. And this is how I want to practice. And so I think for those that are up and coming is to trust the journey. If it is a spiritual journey and a spiritual path, trust the things that come in your path. When we were in school, I would tell all of the women that were in my cohort that were having challenging times, this is going to make you a better midwife. It's not just about checking off the boxes and taking the NARM test. It's about really knowing what gifts are coming through you individually and follow your spiritual path. Do that deep work. Know that the challenges are going to make you a better midwife. Seek out wise women in your community or travel to other countries so that you can look outside of the box that we live in, because Western medicine is not the only way to manage our health. And actually, we're failing in this country of having healthy people.
Sure.
Spiritually, emotionally, physically, we're sick. We're really sick. So I see us as leaders in our community to be able to help people walk through hard times, to talk about how to be healthy, how to live a healthy lifestyle, to talk about that holistic mind, body, spirit connection. And if you don't have a connection to that, if you in your own life, find it for yourself, because you can't really guide other people until you've done that work for yourself. So don't rush into it. I think it's harder to be a midwife when you have young children. Doesn't mean it's impossible or you can't do it, but I think it's really difficult. And I think that traditionally the midwives were the women who their children are already older and they have lived some life, because then I feel like you have that capacity to be able to lead someone else down that path.
Yeah. It's not the first time I've heard that. I'm actually enrolled in Rochelle Garcia Saliga's sacred postpartum program now, and she stepped away from her own practice of midwifery in order to raise her daughter. And she said, I just couldn't be on call. A lot of people do it, but for me, in order to be fully embodied as what a midwife is supposed to do, I can't have my presence distracted in any way. I have to be there for my little kids. And I actually, this year, I'm mostly taking a break from home births. I did one beautiful home VBAC up in Albany, New York, and earlier this month. And I said, I think this is a year for me to grow my connection with my little girls. And, people can say whatever they want, but like, this is my life, and I'm never going to get those days back. And if you want to say I'm less of a birth worker, fine. Okay. I'm less of a birth worker.
Who would say that? That's
Great.
crazy.
People say all kinds of weird things to me. And frankly, I'm not a midwife. Like, I don't call myself a midwife. I have learned from incredible midwives, but people are like, so you're like a midwife. And I'm like, no. to call myself a midwife would be a grand slap in the face to the lineage of the practice of midwifery, which did not start as just birth workers or whatever you want, phrase you want to use that's been co-opted by a political organization. It was a person who sits with women, opposite of women, that helps them through the hardships and the emotional roller coaster of having a baby. Like, that's not what I trained to do. So why on earth would I call myself that? Just because I do out of hospital birth doesn't make me a midwife. What you're getting to in the work of Marin and Rochelle and Wapio and so many other really amazing women in this space, like you guys are carrying the torch. So I think that's great advice. I think if anybody out there is, if you're in med school, if you're thinking about midwifery school, if you're a nurse or whatever, it's more than a calling. I think it's actually a life process that guides you to a space where you now have the tools to sit with a woman in her scariest times, that are also the most exalting, in many, statistically speaking, more likely to be exalting than despairing. But Blyss, you're amazing.
Oh, wow. Thanks.
You really are. I really appreciate you spending some time with me today. And maybe we'll get into the nuts and bolts of how you're attending to this incredible calling of midwifery in a soon in the near future episode. I don't want to give any promises, but just, in case people just wanted, like, if they've never heard of you, can you just give me a yes or no to these questions?
Okay. It's like speed dating.
It's like speed dating. Yeah. Like this is how you know if the midwife, if midwife Blyss, goddess Blyss is for you. Are you,
By the way, for those that don't know me, I don't call myself goddess Blyss. That's a kind of a jokey thing that came out from the podcast. I would never say I'm goddess Blyss.
No, you've had to. Yeah, you're right. But I heard that and I was like, that's all that I can call her now. I can't unhear that in any way.
It's fun. I like it, but
yeah, goddess Blyss. So are you a fan or not a fan? Just say yes or no to all of these things.
Okay.
Vaccines.
No.
Vitamin K.
Fan. I'm neutral.
Neutral.
Yeah.
Rogaine.
I would say I'm not a fan of the injectable. How's that?
Okay, that's fair.
Okay.
Rogaine.
Same. I'm neutral on that one.
How about swabbing for GBS?
I mean, it's kind of dumb. So no.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would say vitamin K is kind of dumb whenever the risk is 9 in 100,000, but this isn't me answering these questions. Okay.
Did I do
especially
it for
if we're going to inject and inflict pain on a baby.
Yeah, I didn't do it for my children, just so you know.
Okay. Yeah. How about circumcision?
Definitely not a fan.
How about
AKA genital mutilation?
Genital mutilation for boys. We'll call it what it is. A cure looking for a disease, I like to call it. How about vaginal birth after cesarean?
Huge fan. Yes.
How about twin home birth?
Huge fan.
How about if a baby happens to be butt first? God forbid.
I mean, I'm a huge fan of supporting breech birth. How's that?
Yeah. Perfect. How about ultrasound?
I think there's a place for it. I think it's highly overused. And I think that that's true for a lot of the things that we do to pregnant women. I opted not to have ultrasounds in my later pregnancies because I just wanted to accept whatever birth and baby I received. But that's a very personal decision. But I think that there's a time and a place for them.
Sure. Just a couple more. How about eye goop? In case
erythromycin?
Yeah.
Yeah, only if you are positive for gonorrhea and chlamydia. But a standard use of it, absolutely not.
Perfect. I had one more, but now I'm forgetting. I just want people to be sort of, I like how you answer these questions because you and Stu on the Birthing Instincts podcast, guys, it is the best birth related podcast on the planet. It has a very, very, there's candor. There's some really deep contemplation around various topics. Stu does a lot of statistical analysis of various recommendations from the CDC and other 3 and 4 letter organizations. You guys can go there to get sort of a deeper insight into some of these questions, but I've learned a great deal from you, Blyss. And,
Thank you.
and we'll
And
go a
we're
little bit
very
deeper.
different. But I think that's one of the things that I like about
You and
our,
Stu?
yeah, we're
Yeah.
different people. We
Yeah.
just see things differently. We're man and woman. We're OB and midwife. We
Very
don't,
masculine, very feminine.
yeah, we don't
Yeah.
see eye to eye on everything, but we're still friends. We haven't canceled each other. You know, I think that this is also like talking about leaders and modeling. We're in a culture that this is one of the things I actually was thinking about talking to you about today. We're in this culture where we just get sound bites and we look at something and we look at a comment and we look at something fast someone said or some small thing
You
about
make a
them,
snap judgment.
and it becomes this whole thing. And you know, we have to be very careful about jumping to conclusions about a human being and who they are as a whole person and how they believe about everything. It's not that simple. And you know, when we start to pull apart some of these really deep concepts about death and birth and all of that, you have to spend time. You have to be able to like see all of the connections and where did this start. It's not just about should you or should you not have an epidural. I mean like we could unpack just that conversation for an entire hour. So I think everybody just needs to slow down a little bit and really take their time. And I know you know, you can get very busy and inundated with all this information. But these are important conversations to be having. So don't jump to conclusions and don't just take a sound bite or something that you find on the internet as being the whole truth about something. As a culture, I think we need to pull back from that.
Yeah, I couldn't agree. I mean, you know how I feel about that. And you're welcome to, you know, you've called me out on certain things. It's like, hey, this is how it landed for you. And I'm like, shit, you're right. I got to re-listen to that. And I run it by my wife and she's like, you're a dum-dum. You keep saying things that are just going to get you in trouble. But
Well, you know what, Nathan? This is the other thing
yeah,
I wanted to say, is that you and Stu, and there are other people like Marin is another one, who are so wholly you.
yeah,
You are you, and you are an individual, and you think about things and you investigate things and you're not afraid to speak about them. And that is so rare these days, that I love having people like you in my life because it keeps me remembering where I start to like play small or feel uncomfortable and maybe don't like kind of just go with the status quo. And I'm like, hey, remember who you are. Remember what's important to you. Don't stop
yeah.
being your whole self. So I say keep being a dum dum because that's how we learn, right? I mean, it's
Yeah,
like you're just being yourself, and we as humans we all make errors, mistakes, say the wrong thing, do the wrong thing. You know, like as parents, our children have to see that, right? How do they know how to make up for that? We're not perfect. We're not going to,
yeah,
anybody who is listening to this who thinks that they've never made a mistake and they're going to be perfect, that's unrealistic. So let's also be forgiving and understanding and have someone called me out as anti-trans the other day. And I sent them a private message and I said, hey, I would love to discuss this with you. I come from a very diverse family. I have trans people in my family. My mom's a lesbian. My best friend's a lesbian. Like, this is absolutely not how I want to be represented. And we had a dialogue about it. I didn't attack her. She didn't attack me. She felt like I said, you know, you got to not jump to conclusions just because one person told you that that's the truth. So that's what I'm talking about. It's like, let's be kind with one another. Let's listen to one another. Let's try and keep our
yeah.
minds open about the other side of things that we feel so strongly about. Because, you know, you could go 20 years down the road, you look up and you're like, oh, back then I thought that this was the truth. And now I've had all this life experience and I feel differently. And we can't walk in
Yeah.
other people's shoes.
Yeah.
So
You have no idea.
we don't.
You know, let's just go into this a tiny little bit further, which is that I have a feeling I know why somebody would say Bliss is anti-trans. And that's
Yeah.
because everything in our world is very binary. Forgive the pun, but it is very black or white. There's a
Mm-hmm.
right and wrong to every
Mm-hmm.
single conversation. And meanwhile, if COVID taught us nothing, there is this massive gray area where even around vaccines, do I ever get vaccines? Do my kids get vaccines? No, I probably never will again. However, can I argue that maybe one person in the history of human existence benefited from a vaccine? Absolutely. So, the dilemma here is that there's this giant gray area. And if we can just be comfortable living in the gray, then that's where important and rich conversation comes from. But I suspect that people would say that you're anti-trans because you insist on using the term pregnant woman instead of pregnant people. Am I on the right track there?
I don't, but maybe my co-host does.
Ah, okay. So that's the kicker there.
And maybe
Why?
we've talked behind the scenes about this. I'm not black and white. So I'm not going to say just woman and I'm not going to just say birthing people. I want to be inclusive and I want to
Yeah,
honor that most of the time it is women giving birth, but I also totally understand and respect that someone might not identify as a woman who's giving birth, and I can make space for that. I can say things and try and change my language and make them feel comfortable as I would with anything else.
I see.
But I'm not black and white about that either. And so I think that is, I kind of got looped into
Kind of
that.
looped in.
And that's it's just a dialogue to happen, to
Yeah,
have, about, don't assume that I am. But yes, I hear what you're saying. And I think it has become very black and white. If you say woman and you're not willing to just say birthing person, then that means that you don't support trans people. And I
right. And
I
vice
just don't
versa.
agree. I don't
Yeah,
agree. Yeah.
right.
I'm
Yeah,
for everybody feeling safe and comfortable in the environment. And I don't want to erase either one of those positions. And I think that we can be loving and open and try and be inclusive and try and understand and be open minded without just saying, oh, because that's your opinion, then I have to do exactly what you say, or I am X, Y, and Z. That's not really fair, is it?
yeah. No, you and I are more similar than you know.
Yeah.
I am like, I don't care. Uh, people come at me for a lot of different reasons. This is another big one though, because I oftentimes will say birthing woman because that's going to reach more people. Like usually I am speaking to somebody who identifies as a woman who's having a
Right.
baby.
Right.
And if you happen to identify as a man and you're going to have a baby, I'm going to use whatever language you prefer because I'm here to take care of you, not to
Yes.
impress my values onto you. But regardless of which term you use, you're going to get shit if you have a big enough platform. So
Yeah.
one thing I'll leave with is during COVID, the early years of COVID, my wife and I dyed our hair bright pink. And I have a tendency to wear very short shorts and I have all kinds of tattoos. Like I'm kind of a wacky looking guy. And then people find out I'm a physician and they're like, bullshit. So,
I love
anyways,
that about you.
so we had a 6-month-old baby. We bought a giant, massive motorhome and we drove it across the country for about 4 to 5 weeks. And we met some of the coolest fucking people that we had ever met in our life in the middle of places like Arkansas and Nebraska and Missouri and all these places that if you were to look at
Mm-hmm.
the news would convince you that there are bad people living in these states that would vote for Trump.
Yeah.
I am not voting blue or red. If I vote, I'm probably going to end up voting for somebody like RFK Jr. I'm just going to throw it out there
Me too.
because he's independent, because he
Yes.
actually isn't playing this buffoonery bicameral system that we've got
Yes.
going on. So as you're
Yes.
driving through the country, you would think, based on what the news tells you, that there's a bunch of nasty, uneducated, stupid Christian people across the country who are just looking to destroy the nation and our values by voting for somebody like Trump. And those were some of the nicest people we had ever interacted with.
Yeah.
And I still don't have to agree with their political views. I still think Trump is a big dickhead.
Yeah.
But
Yep.
But this person is not. This person is offering me, some insights into their local flora and fauna, and that's really, really cool to me.
Yeah.
So we have to get past this gut, this reflexive kind of insanity. It's like not a very human thing that we're doing to one another. This cancel thing. If you can have a dialogue with somebody, the chances are you're probably gonna have more in common than you realize. And if you
Right.
can just open up the space, imagine how much nicer our daily lives would be if we weren't having these like impulsive, reactive ways of communicating with one another on Instagram or otherwise. So
Yeah.
I'm glad that we went there for a moment,
Good.
because
Thank you.
you do carry yourself with an integrity that I would love to see reflected more, even in our birthwork communities, through all the horizontal violence and everything else. I think that you do really model that well. So
Thank you. I'll try. And we're eclectic, right? Like as a
yeah,
person,
yeah,
like
yeah,
don't put me in a box,
yeah,
because I
yeah.
date men and I look like a white cis female. You don't know what my history is. You don't know what my family looks like.
That's
You
right.
don't know my personal experiences. Yeah, I'm I'm privileged because I'm white. I 100% agree with that, but I come from poverty. I've lived on food stamps. I raised my children on food stamps. You have no idea what my history is. So
Yeah,
don't just look at somebody and assume that you know because of what you see or one thing that they say. Remember that we are a combination of everything. And yeah, I think our world, and especially our little community of birth workers fighting this fight for something
yeah,
that is more fringe, if we could come together and try and support one another more rather than tearing each other apart, we could actually push our agenda, so to speak, more forward. And
I
it's
agree.
it's very sad to see us not supporting
Tearing
one
one another
another.
down. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, with that in mind, you have a project that I really hope people can support. It's a nonprofit
Part
called
two.
Bridge. Yeah, right.
Part two.
Well, I do want to give you the opportunity to tell people a little about what you and Lindsay Mealis and some others are trying to build in the Santa Barbara area, right?
No, it's international.
Oh, it's international. Okay.
Hmm.
So tell us about, see, clearly I don't know. I thought you guys were actually trying to set something up brick and mortar as well, but
Hmm.
okay. So tell us about the Bridge Midwives. Clearly I'm clueless. I'm a dum-dum again. Here I am.
It's okay. Obviously, I haven't done a good job describing it out in the world. Um, so the Bridge Midwives project came out of my desire to become a more well-rounded midwife myself, like I said, to travel more internationally and learn from other traditional midwives all over the world. And then 2020 came and we all kind of got locked down, and I didn't know, because I am not vaccinated, if I was ever going to be able to travel again. Actually, at that point, I was like, who knows? So it's I love, someone said it's the archival and revival of traditional midwifery. I love that. So there are many facets to it, but really what it's about is, if we look at traditional midwifery as something that possibly could go extinct, like an animal or a language, we want to be able to interview these women before they pass on, or they don't have the mental capacity to
Oh,
be
I
able
love that.
to talk about these things anymore. So my original vision was I would love to do documentary style modules where those traditional midwives are actually compensated for their wisdom. This is a nonprofit organization. We are not profiting from this. And it's one of the biggest challenges that I'm having right now, is that we need the funding to be able to travel, to bring a film crew, to do editing. And so I
Wow,
have
what
to
a
kind of,
project.
yeah, I kind of have to think outside of the box a little bit more, because just getting donations is not going to be enough. So that is where people can be helpful. I need volunteers of people who are passionate. I need grant writers, and the founders of this project are amazing women who have been practicing a long time and hold the same values that I do. But they're busy, they're practicing, and they're doing all kinds of things. So we kind of have to be the mind of the project and not the workers of the project. And so I'm hitting a little bit of a snag with that, but I know that we'll get through it. Um, so the other thing that we're going to be launching this year is a traditional, and that's part of the problem, is that traditional
Yeah,
has stuff around it. Some people want to call it
Kind of
classic. Some
loaded.
people want to call it pure. Some people, I don't know. So I'm sorry. I don't mean to offend anybody. Please listen to the heart of this project and not to the words that I'm using, because from different perspectives, that's not the word that we should be using. But it's a peer review for people who practice more traditionally, or who want to be kind of going back to the old ways of how midwives practice, rather than becoming a subculture of obstetricians and listening to the ACOG recommendations and stuff like that. But we don't have safe spaces to be able to talk about our birth and to be able to exchange ideas, because as we were just talking about, the horizontal violence that can happen sometimes amongst our peers, it's just not safe for us to learn and to deepen our knowledge and wisdom together. So we will be starting that this year. And there's a whole bunch of other aspects of it that I won't get into, but people can find us on Instagram, and then also thebridgemidwives.com. To be able to get more information, to put yourself on the list, to nominate a midwife who you think should be part of this project. It's all there.
So if somebody wanted to donate, they can go right to bridgemidwives.com.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll make a donation. You'll see it come in later today. And I hope everybody will do the same. bridgemidwives.com. It'll be on behalf of the Born Free Method. We are fully invested in these types of projects. I mean, this is, I've already got a number of people. Machila Motse is going to be one of our keynote speakers at the Twins Breach Conference, and Doña Lina Martinez Miranda's also going to be there. So we've got some people there that I know would love to at least hear what you're up to, because I do want their stories to be captured. So
and I don't think I'm going to be able to attend, because I'm prioritizing seeing family, and I'm probably moving to Ashland, Oregon in a couple of years, so that I can open a twin and breach homestead there, where people can travel and get services from me, because here in California it's illegal, and I've had about enough of that. So Hayes has offered to come and represent the Bridge Midwives and speak about it there. So
yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Have her reach out to me. We'll
will.
make sure that it's wink wink, nudge nudge. We'll get her there.
I will.
Yeah. Amazing, Blyss. Well, thank you so much for spending some time. Guys, go to bridgemidwives.com if you haven't already. It's a beautiful website. I just pulled it up here and I'm like, damn, this is so easy. So we got to get the word out. Blyss otherwise can be found at Birthing Blyss, BLYSS on Instagram, and the Bridge Midwives as well on Instagram. Go follow them. Go listen to the podcast. Birthing Instincts is just legendary. There will never be anything quite like it. So, and it's quite different from this show. Like I have to give that as a caveat. Like there are a lot of good shows out there. There's nothing quite like Birthing Instincts. So it's not a replacement or favoritism. It's just very, very unique. And I love it. I listen to it. I binge it all the time. So
there's nothing quite like you either. We're unique, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. Nobody else can be you because you're already taken. So
yeah. When you first started the podcast, you said something about how we met each other, and I wish that we had more opportunities to work together, and I hope in the future that we find projects to be able to work on, because as you can see, you and I could sit here and talk we could go on and on and on.
Yeah. And I've still got 35 strong years left ahead of me to do this work. So who knows what's coming for us.
Exactly.
So, you know how to reach me if I can support you in any other ways. And I hope we can get some other people to go to bridgemidwives.com and support you as well.
Thank you, sweetheart. Have a wonderful day.
Goodbye, my love. I'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.